Hola, ¿qué tal? ¿Cómo están? Buenos días, tardes o noches, dependiendo de a qué hora estén viendo este video. Mi nombre es Miguel Ángeles, esto es Formación de Escopeta y vamos a platicar acerca de las previas de la NFL. Ya saben que estamos a punto de empezar la temporada y estamos haciendo las previas de cada una de las divisiones, revisando brevemente algunos puntos que deben tomar en cuenta para lo que va a ser la próxima temporada. En esta ocasión toca el turno de la AFC North, esta división que es bastante interesante y bueno, para platicar de esta división en particular, tengo una gran invitada. Me da muchísimo gusto contar con su presencia y vamos a cambiar un poco de lenguaje porque, because Lindsey Ok is here. Thank you very much for being here, Lindsey.
Thank you. This is a new experience for me being on a Spanish show.
Well, a lot of people get surprised to know that Mexico has a huge NFL following, and we are doing a lot of content about the NFL. There are a ton of channels, a ton of accounts doing content in Spanish about the NFL.
That's great. That's great.
So, well, luckily we can do it in English and people will read the subtitles in this video. So
Yeah.
everything will be easier.
Yeah.
Okay. Lindsey, first of all, thank you for being here. Such an honor. We read you on Twitter, like all your hot takes and your comments about the NFL. Okay, so I figured, why not the AFC North, since you have some sort of connections with those teams? By the way, you're a huge Joe Flacco fan, right?
I am, yes.
I know it. So that's why I said, okay, let's start with the AFC North. And basically, we're going to talk about some points about each team, like what are the strengths, the weaknesses, a key player for this team, and like the biggest question coming into the season, like what is the big question in each team, okay? So let's go right to it, and let's start with the Baltimore Ravens.
All right,
okay? I'm going in alphabetical order to avoid like little suspicions, like no, Baltimore because it's the first in the alphabet, okay? So, Lindsey, the Ravens, what are the strengths of this team coming into 2022?
Obviously, I think the biggest strength is they had a horrible season last year as far as injuries are concerned, and that is highly unlikely to happen again. So I feel like everybody's back healthy. Like key players like Marcus Peters are back healthy. They should get J.K. Dobbins back at some point. So that is a huge thing for them to have going into this year.
Completely. I agree completely. I mean, everything that could go wrong for the Ravens last year went wrong.
Right.
Like everybody got injured. It was a point where basically they were getting players out of the street and plugging them in like as starters.
Mm-hmm.
And how likely is for that to happen for an NFL team? It's very, very unlikely. I really like the rushing game as well. This is a team that is really, really committed to their strength. They are very good at running. J.K. Dobbins is supposed to be back, like full speed. That really, really helps. And well, for me, one of the biggest strengths for this team is the coaching. I mean, Harbaugh is a great coach, and sometimes when you get to this point where teams have a lot of injuries and a lot of things like that, it depends on the coach. How well do they handle that? To me, he did a great job last year handling this team, like getting them together and keeping them in order, because it was chaos in Baltimore, injury-wise, right?
Yes. And he's like over the years, I think Harbaugh has kind of turned into more of like a player's coach than he has been in the past. But because I think he's good at like evolving with the team's needs, which, you know, kind of goes with your point.
Yeah, absolutely. And well, let's speak about the weaknesses. What do you see as the weak link in Baltimore?
I still think the wide receiver position is a little bit iffy. And again, this team has had that problem for a long time. I think, I mean, you can't really blame like Hollywood Brown for wanting a trade. I mean, that's whatever. I think they're completely committed to Rashad Bateman, that kind of guy, and then getting the guys like Devin Duvernay involved. But I don't think it's enough. I think in the next couple weeks we'll see them bring in like a veteran. Like they brought in Sammy Watkins last year, just like somebody like that, like an older veteran who doesn't really have much of an upside, but is just kind of there, I guess, if that makes sense. But I think that's their weakest group going into this year.
I completely agree. I mean, as I was saying, Baltimore is really committed to the running game, and sometimes you almost feel like they say, "Well, if we are that good at running the ball, why do we need receivers? Like,
Exactly.
why do we need to invest in great receivers and stuff like that?" Because even when you have a franchise quarterback like Lamar Jackson, he
Mhm.
basically excels on the running game. So you don't really need like big receivers and big time players to get your offense going. So it's like, why do we need them? But at the end of the day, defenses tend to adjust to that, and they will try to push Lamar Jackson to win the games on the passing game, and sometimes that gets them to some trouble. And yeah, I agree that the receivers are in general the weak link for this team.
Yeah.
And well, of course, we need to talk about key players. There are a lot of things and a lot of players that are important for the team. But if you had to pinpoint one player that it's going to be crucial for the Baltimore Ravens season to be good, who will it be?
Lamar Jackson. I know it's kind of cheesy to pick like the quarterback or whatever, but I mean, he's coming into, I mean, as of right now, he still doesn't have an extension.
Hmm.
So he has that, that's obviously been talked about for weeks. So he has that kind of looming over him. And I mean, like you said, they're a team that the offense revolves around him. So they're only going to go as far as Lamar Jackson takes them this year. So I think it really depends on him. And I hate putting like all of like I hate giving like one player all the credit or all the blame because it's really not how it happens in football at all. But
Hmm.
like I said, the entirety of this team revolves around Lamar Jackson.
Absolutely. And I also pick him as the key player. I also have him as the center of this team. Again, this team is really good at running the ball. J.K. Dobbins coming back is going to be huge for them. I believe that. But at the end of the day, they depend on what Lamar Jackson can do with the ball in his hands. So this team needs to prove themselves that they can win with him, but it also gets to a point where it's really complicated for the contract talks because everybody knows that he's the key player in the team, but they are trying to like not pay him that much because some people believe that he's still not a franchise quarterback. But how good does he need to be called a franchise quarterback so far?
Um, that's kind of a tough question because like I understand like both sides of the argument, like extremely. Everybody knows that, running backs have a short, and I'm not calling him a running back, but running backs have like a short shelf life in the NFL. Like 30 is considered old for a running back. And again, I'm not calling Lamar Jackson a running back, but he is a quarterback who runs a lot. And I mean, those types of things need to be taken into account when you are planning to sign your quarterback to a long-term deal. Like you don't, and I mean, the Ravens are one of those teams that they want to get rid of a player earlier rather than later, and I just think, I mean, I understand that point of the argument, but I also think at this point, 4 years in for Lamar Jackson, the team revolves around him. So he is their franchise quarterback.
Absolutely. I mean,
But I also like understand like the longevity argument.
yeah. And I mean, there are cases like Michael Vick and RG3 who basically gives the Ravens the point. Like, these guys can break in any given moment and they're
Exactly.
done. Okay. And for this Baltimore team, what is the biggest question coming into the season? What do you think is going to be the like big storyline for them this year?
Um, Kind of just how can they get their groove back? Everybody has big expectations for the Ravens always. It always seems when you're talking about like who's a Super Bowl contender, the Ravens are always up there. And I mean, they finished last in the division last year. So they're kind of trying to prove that last year was more of the fluke side of things. And like they're going to get, their groove back, I guess.
Completely. And I believe that in order to get the groove back, it depends on how the defense behaves.
Exactly.
This defense, like we always believe, there's always this belief that the Baltimore Ravens defense is elite.
Hmm.
It doesn't matter who's there, it doesn't matter who's the coordinator. you will always believe, like, for sure, the Ravens have a good defense. They
Right.
really need to have a good defense, especially with this AFC, that it has become like a gauntlet where everybody is really, really good at playing football. There are only a couple of teams that are really bad. So, how good can they be on defense in order to stay alive on the competition? Because we know that they have 7 tickets for the playoffs, but 3 are not available for them because those are for divisional champions. So how can they squeeze in order to get a ticket for the playoffs? And I believe that will depend on the defense and how good the defense can become this year.
For sure.
Okay, so that's for the Baltimore Ravens. Again, it's a very short previews in order for people to have just the key points for the upcoming season. Now let's talk about a very interesting team, the Cincinnati Bengals. This team is like the Cinderella of last year. Everybody loves the Bengals right now, and we love them more with the white helmets. Like,
Yeah.
I know. I mean, I personally love the look, and I'm really excited about watching the Bengals play with the white helmets. But I'm more excited about to see how this Bengals team comes back from last season. And well, Lindsay, what are the strengths of this team in your point of view?
The biggest strength, I think, is Joe Burrow's leadership. He's just a guy that, he can come onto the field and be like, my shoulder hurts, my leg hurts, my knee hurts, but we're going to go and we're going to win. And I feel like, and he's good at like getting the team to believe that and getting the team to rally behind him and win. And I mean, he just has last year to build off of, and especially like coming back from that horrible injury the previous year for him, the Super Bowl with like a horrible offensive line. Like, I just think his ability to get the team to rally behind him is just like something that I don't think a lot of quarterbacks have.
There's something special about this guy, and you could see him in his first season. I
Mhm.
remember watching the game where he got injured against Washington, and he was like moving the offense around against the Washington defense, who was supposed to be very good. And you could see that this guy was a rookie and he was really, really good. He had really good presence, and it translated into his second year. Now this is like his second year, like some sort of second year, because of the injury. And I believe that he's a strength for the Bengals, but also all the skilled players around him. He has a great offensive cast, and also I believe that one strength that some people don't believe the Bengals have is the defense. They have a really good defense. They are very underrated. They have not big names, but they are really, really good at defending, and they
Right.
proved that during last season. And they really didn't lose any key players. So I believe that this is a very solid team all around. I don't know how you feel about that.
Yeah, I agree with you. The one thing that I am worried about, and my like big weakness for the team was still the offensive line, as I already talked about.
Hmm.
So I think, and like you said, like I didn't even realize that they didn't really lose anybody, but you're right. And that's huge, especially for, you're in a division against Lamar Jackson, and, you're trying to beat like Justin Herbert and Pat Mahomes, Josh Allen. I mean, all these guys, like you need a key defense to be able to do that.
Absolutely, and that's very important. And yes, you mentioned the weakness. I also believe that the offensive line is still a question. They
Yes.
tried to improve that offensive line. They did their work. Finally, they started to pick guys in order to protect Burrow. He cannot handle a second season with so much pressure on him and guys hitting him on a regular basis. That was important, but still, you don't know how that's gonna work. So that's a weakness for me.
Yeah.
And speaking about this team, they have so many good players. Like, you can talk about Jamar Chase, and you can talk about Joe Mixon and Joe Burrow. Who is the key player for this team in order to try to repeat what they did last year?
I think Jamar Chase, I think he's fantastic. I think his connection with Joe Burrow is something that takes years to build. And they got it right away. So I think we're just going to be able to see more from him this year. And I feel like I mean, I hate kind of making these predictions, but I feel like a couple years in the future, we're going to be talking about him like we talk about, like DeAndre Hopkins or, Julio Jones, and those like great wide receivers. I feel like he's definitely going to be one of them.
Absolutely. And I believe that one guy that needs to like step up a little bit further and become this huge star we were waiting for him is Joe Mixon.
Yes.
If he becomes the kind of running back everybody believed he was going to be coming out of the draft, this team is going to be a real problem for the rest of the AFC. Because again, Burrow and Chase are a really good match, and they are a great duo. If they also have a really good Joe Mixon, this team can be like really unstoppable on the offense. I would love to see him like step up a little bit in order to match what Burrow and Chase are doing. That would be a great trio to play with the Bengals. And well, what is the biggest question for this team coming into the season? What do you think this team is trying to accomplish?
So back when we were talking about the Ravens, I kind of said that they needed to prove that like last year's injuries were kind of a fluke. This Bengals team needs to do the opposite. They need to prove that them getting to the Super Bowl was not a fluke. They need to prove that they were supposed to be there, they were meant to be there, and it wasn't a mistake, it wasn't luck. So I think that's really what they are looking to do.
Absolutely. And I will go back to the offensive line. The biggest question is how good this offensive line can be. If they can be half better than what they were last year, if they can improve like 50%, not being the best offensive line in the NFL, if they can be like slightly better and avoid like, I don't know, give Burrow 20 sacks less,
right?
This team will be amazing. This team will be hard to stop. They really can get there. And this is also a very young team.
Mm-hmm.
So let's see how they handle that. It will be interesting. It will be a very fun season in Cincinnati, that's for sure. Now, it's going to be weird to talk about this team, especially because we're recording this show like a couple of hours after the news of certain quarterback came out. And we need to talk about the Cleveland Browns.
Very interesting team.
Like very, very, very interesting. I don't know how to feel about this team because, well, we know the situation with the Browns. They traded for Deshaun Watson. It got really weird with Baker Mayfield. Finally, they got rid of him. They sent him to Carolina in order to try to ease things for Deshaun. And now today again, we're recording on a Monday. The news got out he's going to be suspended for 6 games, depending on if the NFL wants to appeal the decision. Looks like they are not going to do that. So if everything stays put, it will be 6 games. And actually, the first 6 games of the Browns are the easiest schedule in the NFL for the first 6 games. So it gets really, really weird and really uncomfortable to talk about this team for all these reasons. But we need to talk about them. And okay, Lindsay, what are the strengths of the Browns coming into the season?
Their defense. I think their defense is probably it's hard because we haven't really seen Deshaun Watson play with this team yet, but I think their defense is definitely, if not one of the best in the AFC, probably the best in the division on paper at this point. So I'm really looking forward to seeing what they can do.
Completely agree. I mean, they have Myles Garrett as the star of this defense, but the rest of the players, the rest of the cast around him is really, really good. The reason why the Browns have been more consistent in recent years is because of the defense. They really got something going on there. I also like the defensive line. I still like the offensive line. I like the rushing game. I believe that they can help that, especially in these 6 games. When Jacoby Brissett is going to be the quarterback, they can rely on a good rushing game, a good defense to try to get some games done and get everything ready for when Deshaun Watson comes back. Yeah. And obviously, we need to talk about the weaknesses. What do you think is the weak point for the Browns?
Obviously, I think anytime you lose your starter for a prolonged period of time, I think it's not necessarily like them having 6 games without their quarterback. It's how do they bounce back from being without their starter. Like, does Deshaun come in and win immediately? Does he take a little bit to, get up to the speed of things? And like you said, those 6 games are the easiest on their schedule. And it's just, I mean, I don't know. And they played the Steelers back to back, I think, during those games. So it's like, I mean, those are 2 huge division games. So I just think it's more about them being able to bounce back, not necessarily not having their starter, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I completely I agree because I also have that point as a weakness. Like you have a guy who didn't play at all during 2021. He was on the roster, but he was always a healthy scratch for the Texans. So he basically was like training with them and trying to like be in shape for games, but he knew he was not going to play
Right.
any single game. So his last football action was like in 2020. You have a guy who hasn't played for a year.
Mm-hmm.
And then when you try to ease him back to your team, he's gonna lose the first 6 games. He's gonna come back and like make his debut for the Cleveland Browns, like in the middle part of the season.
Mm-hmm.
When every team is more adjust to everything, the defenses are gonna be playing better. So he doesn't have this extra time to adjust, to adapt to the Cleveland Browns offense. He's gonna be thrown right into the fire. And most likely, if the Browns are able to get out of these 6 games with a good record, they are going to be in contention for a playoff spot. And they will need him to be a really good quarterback. And we don't know if he's going to be like able to get to speed
Right.
at this
Yeah.
with this team. Like everything plays like against the Browns in this situation because outside of the PR nightmare that is going to be having Deshaun Watson in the team, you also have to consider that he hasn't played in a year and he's not going to play in the first 6 games. So,
Yeah.
I mean, doesn't look good this year. Maybe next year everything will be better for them, but right
Yeah.
now things look complicated. Like it's going to be a transition year for me for this team.
Yeah. It's like a rebuild year without
Absolutely.
be one.
Yeah, and you know that the quarterback is really good, and you know he can play at a high level, but you have to wait for him to get back to speed and to understand how the system goes. And you will have to basically let this year go. Like, okay, let's see what happens, and whatever happens, happens.
Yeah.
And of course, what is the biggest question for this team? I mean, is Deshaun Watson and the way the quarterback situation is going the biggest question for you?
Yeah. Well, I had like, how can they kind of like survive this whole thing? I mean, obviously it doesn't. The Browns don't look good right now. I'll just say it. They just don't. So does that sort of have an effect on how the team plays? Like, I'm thinking. I mean, we both know how football fans are. When Deshaun Watson comes on the field, are people going to throw things at him? Like, I mean, it's just like such a nightmare that I think could have been avoided. But I mean, they sold their souls to get this player. So I'm just not sure how, like, on the field and off the field, they're just going to, I guess, cover their eyes and get through it. Like, it's just like a big thing. And I guess we're not going to really see how it unfolds until halfway through the season.
Absolutely. And for me, that's also the thing, how to handle the drama.
Yeah.
Like, because there's going to be drama.
Even like interviewing him after a game, like, how are you going to do that?
Are you going to tell the reporters, like, you cannot ask him about the suspension? Like, because you can do that as a team. But how do you look as a team asking reporters not to ask him about the suspension? Like, hey, if could you just not mention that? Like, that would be great. Like, how are the reporters going to deal with that?
Yeah.
The press conferences, how are they going to be when he comes back? Like, hey, Deshaun, how was the suspension? Like, how are you feeling right now after everything? Whoa. How do you ask him that? And how does the team process that? And that's why I jumped to the question part before the key player, because I want to know who's going to be the key player for you coming into the season.
Myles Garrett, I think. Like I mentioned, the defense, I just think he's such a great leader as far as that goes. And I mean, a lot of these, like, I'm not trying to say like younger players can't be good leaders, but a lot of the younger players need like that huge defensive like leader who kind of holds everybody together. That's also not the head coach, if that makes sense. So like the
Mhm.
Ravens had like an Ed Reed, a Ray Lewis. The Steelers had guys like that. So it's like I think Myles Garrett absolutely fits that bill. I think if they can hold it all together, like we just talked about, I feel like Myles Garrett's going to be a big factor in doing that.
Especially because if you remember when he had this deal with Mason Rudolph,
Yeah.
he said, "I'm not like that. I promise you, I'm not. I'm gonna be different. I'm gonna show everybody that I can be a good leader for this team." And he has proven that
Yes.
ever since the helmet incident, he has been like a really, really good player, a really good leader. So he's like out for a bigger challenge this year, like trying to be the calm in the middle of the storm
Right.
for the Browns. And I also want to add that Kevin Stefanski will have a big role in this team. Like, how do you handle everything and keep your team together? Not only for 6 weeks, because 6 weeks is gonna be when Deshaun is out. How do you keep them together for the next 12 weeks when Deshaun is gonna be there?
Right.
So I believe that will be the most important duo in the
Yeah.
Browns.
And I also want to add, like, there was all that talk about how, like, Kevin Stefanski and Baker Mayfield didn't get along or whatever. So it'll be interesting to see how Kevin Stefanski changes, I guess, as far as, like, being a head coach to the entire team if Baker Mayfield's not there.
Absolutely. I mean, there are a lot of stories coming out of Cleveland. As you said, it's an interesting team.
Yes.
Not for the right reasons, but they are interesting.
And people are
Okay?
going to talk about them, so.
Yeah. I mean, everybody will be paying attention to the Browns all year long. They will be watching the game, trying to see what happens with them.
Right.
And a lot of people will really, really get happy when they lose.
Yes, exactly.
They suddenly turn the attention to them and not in the right way. Not like the Bengals. That everybody's paying attention to the Bengals because they are like the cool team to watch.
Mm-hmm.
The Browns are like, oh, here are the Browns again, being the Browns, getting in trouble. It's going to be a tough year for the Browns.
Yes.
And speaking of tough years, a team that looks poised for a rough year, a complicated year, are the Pittsburgh Steelers. I mean, that happens with teams when they lose the franchise quarterback by retirement or whatever. The Steelers are in the middle of a rebuild process. Even nobody mentions that in Pittsburgh. They say, "Oh well, here we are, and everything is fine." This team has a lot of good things going on for them. Some things that are not going really good for them. What do you see as the biggest strength for the Steelers?
Kind of like the Browns, kind of like the Ravens of the past. You've always heard about the Steelers defense.
Hmm.
I think they're the most like kept together, I guess, on the side of the ball. Like I just think their defense is going to be still really good amid a lot of like other changes elsewhere.
No, I mean, and of course, when you talk about the Pittsburgh Steelers, it's the same thing as the Ravens. They have good defense. Doesn't matter the year, doesn't matter what's happening in the NFL, the Steelers have a good defense. And last year, there was this belief that the offense was not playing at the level of the defense. They say, well, if the Steelers were playing a little bit better on offense, this team would be really, really better
Right.
because the defense was good. And they still feel like a good defensive team. Like they can really get along with the defense. They have TJ Watt. Obviously, that's a huge piece for them. And I also want to add Najee Harris. I didn't like when they drafted him because you say, well, who drafts a running back in the first round of the draft
Yeah.
because of the value? He
Yeah.
has proven to be a really, really good running back for the time he's going to be a starting running back in the NFL. He looks very good. And he's going to be huge for whoever ends up being the starting quarterback. The Steelers need to have Najee Harris like as the center of the offense in order to get things better, right?
Agreed. Yes.
Okay, and well, we need to talk about the obvious. What is the weakness in the Steelers?
The quarterback position. um, I I like Mitch Trubisky. I do. I think he kind of didn't really get a fair shot in Chicago. I like Kenny Pickett. I think he'll eventually be good. I just don't think he's ready yet. I don't really like Mason Rudolph. I'll be honest. I think he's like a career backup at this point. So it's kind of like whichever one you pick, there are some like things that you're just going to have to deal with. So it's, I mean, I really thought they were going to get Jimmy Garoppolo. I think he still is an immediate upgrade over any of those guys.
Mm-hmm.
But obviously, I mean, that still could happen. I don't know. I don't really see it happening unless they decide to I heard some crazy rumor about them wanting to trade Mason and then just sit Kenny and then get Jimmy and then have Mitch back him up or whatever. I don't know. That could happen. Crazier stuff has happened, but I don't know. It's just kind of in the AFC where, I mean, more than half the teams have some star at quarterback. Here are the Steelers with 3 guys that can't really play the position very well.
Yeah, I mean, at least at the time being, there's no certainty about the Steelers quarterbacks, and that's the biggest question for them. I mean, you've heard the stories about Kenny Pickett and his hand size being a problem. We know the Mitch Trubisky story. I mean, when you think about his time in Chicago and you see what Justin Fields is dealing with, you say, well, maybe it was not him.
Yeah.
Because again, Justin Fields is basically going through the same thing. Lack of good receivers, not a really good offense. The coaching is not working for him in order to succeed. So you say, well, maybe Mitch needs another scenario where things are better for him. The Steelers provide an upgrade, a real upgrade against what the Chicago Bears were doing for Mitch. So you say, well, maybe he can be the quarterback, at least for the time being, while Kenny Pickett gets up to speed. But there's nothing certain for these 3 guys. And I also don't like Mason Rudolph as a starting option.
Mm-hmm.
He looks like a good backup. Okay, if the starting quarterback,
you can win a couple games with him if you need to. But other than that, I don't think as a starter.
Yeah, I have a podcast about the Washington Commanders. I'm a Washington fan, and that's what I keep saying about Taylor Heinicke.
Yeah,
these guys are really good backup quarterbacks, and that's a very important job in the NFL.
Yes,
there are not enough starting quarterbacks, so obviously you don't have less good backup quarterbacks. So there's a job for Mason Rudolph in Pittsburgh, but not starting quarterback, and that's for sure. And well, who needs to step up, or who is the key player for the Steelers in order to have a successful season?
I have TJ Watt. I think he is probably, he's not better than Aaron Donald, but I mean, he's very close to being there. I think he's one of the best overall players in the entire league. Great guy, huge defensive leader. And I just think, and then Najee Harris too. I think when you brought him up, I agree with that too. So I think those 2 guys on either side of the ball are going to be huge.
Yeah, I have Najee Harris as the key player. If Najee Harris can lead the offense and ease things up for Trubisky or Pickett or whatever happens in Pittsburgh, the Steelers have a shot.
Yeah,
maybe not at going deep in the playoffs, but maybe they can be in the mix for competing for a spot. I mean, they are not that bad.
Yeah, this division is very winnable for anybody.
Yeah, I mean, anything could happen. I mean, the Bengals can easily implode after a good season. Okay. It's very possible. I mean, they won't be the first team to implode after a Super Bowl.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe they can implode this year and come back next year. I don't know. Those things have happened. They happen even to the Patriots in the good years of Bill Belichick. They can have a rough season after a Super Bowl. That's perfectly fine. It happened to the Eagles. It happened to whatever team you want to talk about. So maybe it can happen. And then it's an open competition for everybody. So the Steelers can easily maybe squeak in and running the ball and having good defense. I mean, those are the basics of football.
Yes.
If you run the ball and you play good defense, you can win games. And if you win games, you can maybe somehow get a ticket to the playoffs. Maybe. Okay. So, well, after that, obviously we need to talk about maybe some predictions. It's very early in the season. We haven't had any preseason games so far. But if you had to like predict how this division is going to end, what will be your prediction, Lindsay?
Okay, I have the Bengals winning. I think they'll, win the division. The Ravens could be a wild card team. I think they have a very good shot, but that's only if everything shakes out the way that they plan on it. For the Browns, I have them finishing third, and that's only if like Deshaun, kind of gets it together in like the second half of the season. And then I have the Steelers finishing last. But I mean, those two teams I think can swap pretty easily.
I like it. I really, really like that prediction. Yes, I believe the Bengals. I mean, we're trying to be optimistic. Like
Yeah.
the Bengals can be again a really good team, and they can improve what they did last year and keeping pace with the rest of the AFC, especially the West, who is going to be like a really, really gauntlet.
Yeah.
They can win. The Ravens, I really like what Ravens have. Like again, they have maybe the best coach in the division. They have a good team. Maybe they can get everything in order. I believe that the Browns and the Steelers are the wild cards here. I don't know how to feel about both teams.
Yeah.
So many questions about the quarterbacks.
Yeah. It's kind of like, I guess, however things shake out. I mean, because we've seen this division has always been such, like, even when the Browns were losing every week, like they still always played the Ravens hard. They still always played the Steelers hard, and they ended up losing, but it was still like, a battle. It's always a battle. So it should be very interesting this year.
Yeah, I mean, and this is a very interesting situation coming into 2022. The AFC North looks like a really fun division to watch. Maybe not going to be like AFC West levels of fun.
Mm-hmm.
That's going to be like huge. But this division is really, really interesting. It will have a lot of storylines that we need to follow along during the year. And well, let's see how that unfolds.
Mm-hmm.
Hopefully, it will be somewhere around what we predicted, so we look good at the end of the year.
Yeah, we always like to look good and be right.
Yeah, I mean, and if not, we will say, well, who knows? The NFL is unpredictable.
Yeah.
And well, Lindsay, this was a great conversation. I really, really like it. Could you please tell us where can people find you? Like, what are you doing so they can follow you on your content creation things?
Yeah, so you can follow me on Twitter, Instagram, anything at Lindsey Ok. I do have a website where I blog pretty much every day, and then I have a Patreon, which is essentially like a YouTube channel. It does cost money to join, but I mean, it goes right back into like my travel, my going to things like that and stuff. So that's what I'm doing. And I'm actually right in the middle of doing a training camp preview for every team. So I think this is my last week of doing it, and I just did the AFC North. I think it was like Thursday. So this is like perfect timing to talk about it again.
Perfect. Like everything got in order because we were like for weeks trying to get this thing done, and I'm really happy it finally happened, and it got in a perfect time.
Yeah.
And well, obviously, hopefully, it will not be the last time you're here with us, right?
Of course, anytime.
Perfect. And I will already follow you on Twitter, and we will check your other websites like the Patreon, because well, you're generating content, like special content for the people who subscribe, right?
Yeah. So I do like a written version, which is like one tier, and then there's a video version, which is like the highest tier.
So if you're interested, if our audience is interested in this content, they can subscribe, and they can get more content, right?
Right.
Perfect. We will post the links to your website and everything on the description of this video so people can find it easily. And well, thank you very much for being here, Lindsay. Again, hopefully it will not be the last. Yeah. And well, I'm going to say goodbye to the people in Spanish, so just give me a minute.
All right.
A todas las personas que estén acá, mil gracias por estar viendo este video. Ya saben, si le pueden dar un like y si se pueden suscribir a este canal, eso ayuda muchísimo. Lindsay, muchas gracias.
Thank you.
Nos vemos en la próxima. Estaremos pasando todos los demás previas de la NFL. Estén atentos. Bye.